Everybody, this is Dennis and Sager, and I'm welcoming you to our AACP Connect event today, January 19. We're so glad that you've made it, and I'm broadcasting live here from my father-in-law's attic. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. We're looking forward to today's event to talk about child protection. Also, I want to welcome not only camp professionals today, but I know we've got some educators in the crowd and some other professionals from around the North American division. And so we want to just let you know that we're so glad you've joined us today. Thanks for being here to talk about this really important topic, protecting the children, some of the most important things God's given us stewardship of. So we're just so excited that you've joined us. Thank you for being here. And I want to remind you that there's a document that's going to go along with today's presentation. So if you haven't gotten that yet, you're going to want to check down in the chat. Tracy's going to throw that up there. Don't forget about the chat feature down there. It should be at the bottom of your display. It's a big dialogue bubble that says chat. If you click on there, he's just posted the link to go get that if you haven't done so already. So just you can do a cut and paste of the link that Tracy's put up there, grab that document and bring it right back here so you'll have it today. So as our presenter is talking, you'll be able to follow along, and I think it'll help you remember the information that we've learned today. So remember about that chat feature. If you have questions today while our presenter is talking, just make sure and put that chat right down there, that question right down there in our chat, and we'll get that to him at the end of our presentation. Today's flow is going to work like this. I'm going to introduce our speaker. He'll get going, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end. So again, if you do have questions that you think of, put them right there in that chat. We'll keep track of those, and we'll get them to him at the end of his presentation so we can have some question and answer time. Again, we're just glad that you're here, and I'm going to introduce our speaker now. His name is Rick Brashler, and a little bit of information about him as he gets going. Rick has dedicated a 28-year career to protect and empower youth organizations throughout the world. As a senior risk advisor for the Red Barn Risk Consulting, the director of safety and risk management at Kennecott Camps, a civil litigation subject matter expert, and an endangered child alert program expert panelist, and an ordained pastor. Rick's blend of education and experience offers him a unique perspective on balancing opportunities with risk in a youth setting. Rick is the author and developer of the Child Protection Plan, a comprehensive guide to combat child abuse in youth-serving organizations. This plan is considered first-rate by U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft. It's a new, innovative approach to combat this age-old threat to children in an organizational setting. Rick lives and works near Branson, Missouri, and is a loving husband, avid outdoorsman, and father of 5 kids. Rick, we welcome you today, and the time is yours.
Well, thanks, Dennison. And, I think as people listen to my bio, they're like, man, this guy has had no fun in his whole career. And I assure you, I am a fun person. I have testimonies to say Rick is fun. But as it would be, God has put me in a place, as he has many of you, that say, wow, I never saw myself going into the world of safety, risk, or whatever. But nevertheless, here we are. And as you see God continue to lead and guide not only your careers, your lives, as you invest with kids, he's done so in mine and in very interesting ways, thus finding me here with you today to be able to talk and advance this whole topic called child protection. And we all know a lot about it. Some of us know more than others. But what I find is I travel around the country and I speak with organizations. And in fact, this time last year, I was in Cairo training an organization on how to protect children, and especially in a culture where child sexual abuse is not illegal. And so there are no laws against it. There is no conviction against it. There are no rules against it in Cairo or in Egypt proper. So try protecting kids there where it's not illegal. But nevertheless, it's a global problem as much as it is a national problem. And just because we made it illegal does not make evildoers want to not perpetrate. So I sure appreciate Dennison and Pastor Tracy and the team having me with you guys today. How many of you are sick and tired of Zoom? Now, I would ask, how many of you bought Zoom stock a year ago? Yeah, we all missed that one. Okay, good. Bill's on it. Way to go, Bill. Woo, man, I missed that boat too. So, so sorry. I'm not on top of that either. But nevertheless, I really want to take the time we have to share together to speak to my computer. And I see some faces there. So thanks for your videos so I can know people are there on the other side. As Dennison called me and said, hey, would you like to spend an hour and a half speaking to our team on just child protection? It's always hard to know where to land as to where people are at, but nevertheless, we step back and the most important thing that I always want to try to do is to say, let's at least clarify what is the threat, what are some myths about the threat, what are some strategies that we need to be thinking about, because as we learn more good intelligence, it should change then how we approach protecting kids in our programs. And it makes it problematic because the nature of this threat is not a foreign threat. It's a threat that the FBI would say is one of us, which makes it even more problematic, as you know. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'll just let the PowerPoint continue to kind of guide a lot of our conversation today. So Dennison, thumbs up if you see that now. Good deal. All right, and if you have questions, I think feel free to put them in the chat section of the Zoom there. We'll either address it as we go through it, or certainly at the end, we'll try to address as many questions as possible. As Dennison said, I've had a pretty interesting 28-year career, most of which I have 5 kids. Now, that little child in the middle, that's not a puppet, the one that looks exactly like me. You would think that's kind of a funny puppet thing, but that's actually a human being. This is a little older picture. My kids span from 31 years old down to 8, and I don't believe in retirement apparently, because I'm 54 with an 8-year-old actually living in my home. So there's an endless supply of kid stuff. But I have spent the bulk of my adult career, the last 28 years, in the safety insurance, risk, and security field. As you can see, I do it residentially with Kanakuk Ministries, Kanakuk Camps. We operate 6 resident camps, 60-day camps with about 25,000 participants, using about 2,000 staff here, mostly in Missouri and the 8 surrounding states. And so my job is obviously in the full spectrum of all things safety, all things risk. That would include the kind of threats you guys have to mitigate all the time: lightning, drowning, car accidents, and everything else, including abuse, all fall under my respective duties day in and day out to safeguard our organization. I do consult with youth organizations all over the world, all over the US. I learn a lot through that. I probably learn more in my civil litigation work, because that's where I actually get into lawsuits and I read all the depositions, I read all of the complaints, I read all the filings as a part to define what was the duty of care owed. And that's actually a rather interesting learning curve. And I would never recommend anybody intentionally do that, by the way. Especially getting deposed in court is never any fun. It's just necessary. I've been a licensed broker for over 28 years as well. And so that gives me a little bit of aspect of what are you and I dealing with in the insurance aspect of this industry. And then working as an ordained pastor with both kids and youth have given me a little bit more of an operations perspective of what is going on in there. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, especially in your state. And so nothing in here should be deemed as legal advice, and you need to be able to speak with someone in your state as it relates to any type of legal aspects you're dealing with. If you haven't already been asked this, you probably will, and it will be point blank in a lot of times, where the parent just comes up and addresses you directly to say, okay, let's just ask it and get it out of the way. How will you protect my kids against abuse in your program? I'd get a show of hands, except I can't see too many people, and somebody's sitting in a dark room down there, so that looks kind of sketchy anyway. So, okay, there's some hands, good, okay. This question is going to be asked more and more because parents are becoming more knowledgeable, more informed. They just don't know how to understand what we're telling them. And by the way, when anybody asks that, the answer that most of us come up with is, well, we do background checks. And we think that alone is going to impress most parents enough to make them be quiet and move down and get out of the camp so that we can get back to camping or youth programming or whatever. And unfortunately, that largely is accepted by parents to be a good thing to do. We're not going to throw that out with the bathwater, but in and of itself, you and I need to get far beyond the token responses that we have to say, oh, we do applications and background checks and hope that parents are okay with that, because in large part, they're being informed more and more, even on MSNBC's report of what to ask camps, that really is insufficient when it comes to protecting my kid from abuse. Well, my story is important because you're sitting there thinking, why are we listening to this bald guy when we could be fishing or mowing the yard or something, or wearing our masks because we love it? Well, I'm here just because I have a story, I have a testimony, and I have an opinion. And my story is back in 93, I gave my first child abuse seminar in 1993. And unfortunately, for 15 years, we were telling everybody the wrong thing. Sorry if you were part of that group. I didn't mean to tell you the wrong thing. I was using the information provided for me at the time by the insurance industry, by government regulators, by other big, large youth-serving organizational leaders saying, this is how we protect kids and this is what you should do. So guess what? We went out and advised clients that way for many, many years, and we ran that play. It did not move the needle. What we were telling people to do, in fact, for the last 7 years, the new report out by Richard Hammer is the most litigated aspect of churches across America is child sex abuse is number one. It continues to lead the way in litigation. Why? Because it continues to be perpetrated even in spite of everything. Well, in 2003, Kanakuk Camps hired me to come in and be their resident risk and safety director. I analyzed Kanakuk against what we knew to be the duty of care owed as instructed all the way back to 1993 for me. And we found Kanakuk was not just meeting the duty of care, they were actually exceeding it. So this may look familiar to you. These are the tenets of most child protection efforts across the country, and they're valuable in and of themselves. They're just not comprehensive and holistic enough to really change many of the outcomes. And you're probably doing a lot of these in your organization as well, with the applications, reference verifications, work and history, interview process. We're all doing a lot of criminal and sex offender screening. Actually, people are getting wealthy because we're doing so much screening and paying for it that it has become a big business. We were doing abuse awareness training, including characteristics of victims and abusers way back in 03, 05, 09. We had policies at Kanakuk, 3-person rules, codes of conduct, and others. Consequences for failure. We supervised many activities with many layers of supervision, and we had a pretty stringent reporting method. We thought we not only had a plan that was acceptable for the insurance company, which we did because we bought insurance with no problem. We were doing more than the normal or average camp or church or group out there because we're a large organization. So we had more layers, possibly like a guy like me who was in and out of the camp all the time, supervising as well as other members of my team and all. And yet in a plan that I felt was exceeding a duty of care, we found out in 2009 that this was reported and has now become well known, that we had a director, a very well-known director, a very seasoned director. This is a guy that you put on the poster. He embodies the organization. He embodies the culture. His camp was the most excited camp. He had about 3,000 kids who attended his camp. It filled the fastest. This is a guy that you would never suspect. In fact, with the 15 years of training that I had previous to me working with Pete, and I worked with Pete for 7 years, and I was in and out of Pete's camp every summer, every week through there. I went on retreats with Pete in the wintertime where we would be in a van driving 20 hours back and forth, had lunches with Pete numerous times. I mean, I labored next to Pete and I was a friend of Pete's. And so for 7 years, I worked with him only to find out that in March of 2009, a report from an attorney working with a client notified us that something inappropriate had occurred between Pete and a minor. It would come out later that not only did Pete have that incident, Pete would have dozens of victims in his 10-year career with being inappropriate with children, which led us to understand that this list here, although a good list, failed to produce the kind of outcomes that we intended for it to happen. We were busy doing this. We were busy doing these checklists, and yet he navigated. And so it was incumbent upon us to find out how in the world did a guy navigate a system of which, number one, I was on the wall watching. And we had other people on the wall watching. I had a 25-year retired highway patrolman serving with me in a director level position in safety. Fooled him too. He was trained in interrogation. He was trained in profiling, and yet for 6 years, failed. He was able to navigate and fool everyone. How did he do it? What should we do differently? Well, that sent us on this path. This isn't intended for you to see every resource here and take the 10,000 hours that I spent to explore all this, but this is to let you know that there's an ocean of information on this that up until then really had been shielded from me. Why, I don't know, because none of this was ever at a camp conference or a church conference or a youth leaders conference. And so therefore it was surprising to me to find out as I talked with all these professionals all over the country and attended their conferences and sat across the tables from them and tried to explore what is it I need to know that I didn't know before, because the plan that America is running isn't working. The play that we put on the field traditionally and that we've been teaching for years and that many of us around the room and maybe the world have been executing simply failed. We learned a lot of things that, like I said, it kind of upset me, because if there's anybody in America that should have known what I was able to find out, it should have been teachers, coaches, pastors, youth leaders, because we're the ones at the front lines. And yet a lot of this research, a lot of these truths, simply we're not reaching out and touching and implementing it out where we could execute. So we went back to this list and found out, all right, well, we learned a lot of new stuff. So when we look at this, these are all good stuff and we're not going to throw them out, but they're just incomplete. And some of them are based really on a false sense of security. But we did find out that this list in and of itself was not really focused on the right target. It was actually on the wrong target, the wrong thread, asking the wrong questions, obviously giving us wrong expectations based on wrong intelligence, making wrong assumptions and the wrong outcomes. Guys, we were professional people pursuing child protection, and yet the system we had built upon was flawed. So we began to go, you know what, we're going to build something better, bigger, faster. Kind of sounds like the Bionic Man at this point, but nevertheless, we're trying to do something more than we did to protect kids, because that's why we exist. So we built this plan. We built strategies around protection zones and remedies and management fields and prevention stages and protection elements. We had it peer reviewed by many experts, including John Ashcroft and his team of U.S. prosecuting attorneys, to go, hey, are we on the right track? And we continue to do this, and we continue to build this plan to be more of a sharper executed plan. Well, we built this in 2010 then. We continue to build it today. But in 2011, you would think the last place on earth that it would be safe to exploit a child would be Kanakuk, because by then we are on high alert. You know what happens after a series of abusive episodes? Obviously comes a fallout of your organization. 30 to 40% of our campers didn't show up in 2010 because they didn't trust us. A lot of attorneys showed up because we saw a lot of lawsuits. We saw claims. We saw the devastation that occurs to an organization from a failure to trust to a reputational, to civil lawsuits, to massive layoffs, all the carnage, if you will, from victimization of victims all the way to ministries and camps and organizations losing their ability to minister. You would think it would be the last place, but in July of 2011, this happened. We had a counselor that, in spite of everything that we were doing, decided that that didn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and engage young boys inappropriately. Now, there's a big difference between the first predator and the second predator. The first predator had a 10-year career. He had dozens of victims. He had was not reported until one of his victims reached a kind of an aged out opportunity around 20 or 21 or whatever that finally reported him. And so that's the tale that you hear of most often, is a long-term abusive situation. This person had about in 2011, this individual had about a 5-day career. It's different than 10 years versus 5 days. He was only able to begin to perpetrate against 3 or 4 young men before they actually reported him internally in the camp. he was investigated. He got 10 years in prison because he decided to violate Missouri statute and child sexual abuse, and he was convicted of it. Rightfully so. He's serving time because of the transgressions that he made. The difference, and I think we all have to come to some understanding of point, is it just success that we prevent everything, knowing that nobody in the room here today can prevent the human will from trying to act and perpetrate and violate not only the rules, but also pursue people? Our plan can't just try to prevent or report. Our plan has to also be there to respond immediately and enable and equip people in the day-to-day behavioral interactions that they're having with other minors and with adults to be able to do what the boys did in 2011. And they did that as a strategy that we set up internally, that we're encouraging and training 25,000 minors. What do I do if somebody engages me and it's uncomfortable? How do I navigate that, and who do I tell? And these boys did exactly what we asked them to do. And the only thing you got to worry about this, and not that we're going to protect kids, because we're going to do it every day, but don't expect a pat on the back by the media. Even though you caught somebody in your camp before they went too far or very far, because they still like to be edgy in the news and try to sell, well, not papers anymore, but well, as we kind of walk through this, we're going to talk through some different perspectives, because I think it's important that we all walk through this together, walking out of it with a similar perspective, so that we can then springboard into more measures that we may need to take. Well, across America, we all know that there are going to be many different laws that govern your states. They come in the way of verbal abuse laws, emotional abuse laws, physical, sexual abuse laws. They're writing in more statutory language about two things that you need to be aware of. Number one, you can talk your way into prison if your vocabulary has the intent to be erotic or sexual in nature in an inappropriate way. That's being written into laws, and rightfully so. You shouldn't do that with a minor. But now finally statutory laws are beginning to recognize that. The other thing they're beginning to do is to write laws around these things and these phones, and the fact that anybody anywhere can pull up something inappropriately pornographic, show it to a minor, and now they're statutorily writing those in that you can be convicted because you decided to do that. And probably the thing that sneaks up on you and I as bystanders, as innocent people that are responsible trying to protect kids, is when we learn about an inappropriate incident. Obviously, you already know about mandatory reporting laws. That's pretty common around the country, and that we are mostly mandatory reporters as youth leaders in most of the 50 states. But now law enforcement agencies are locking up people more now than ever for failure to mandatorily report in an appropriate amount of time within your jurisdiction, which is now causing us to second guess or to question how long is an appropriate time is, and what should I do quickly versus an internal investigation. It's very problematic. They're advancing it quickly, and it gets political because sheriffs may want to be reelected, so they may try to use as an opportunity to there are more political things at work than just the incident that may have occurred, and you have to navigate that in your own jurisdiction very delicately but effectively. Well, for the sake of definition and teaching, we land on this space, but the definition of child sexual abuse is different in all 50 states. Similar language, similar content, but states are the ones who drive and regulate abuse, not the federal government. Well, for the sake of this room, any act where an adult or older adolescent uses a child for sexual stimulation, the key right there we have to understand is it's not only always an adult. We'll find out in the statistics that a third of the reports made across the country are perpetrated by another minor. And so we've got to be very careful about how we group people in different settings. Obviously, it includes sexual activities with children. The consent language has to be navigated, and you and I are the ones who have to watch how we interpret what that looks like as we walk through different peer-to-peer situations as it relates to consent laws. Definitely the statutory language in all 50 states when it comes down to child sexual abuse is anybody 18 and over, whether the child consents or not, because they say children 17 and under cannot consent with an adult, should not be involved in any sexual activity, or it's statutorily criminal. Obviously, it includes things like indecent exposure. You would think that would be a problem, but in a lot of camp settings, the streaking, the mooning, the other kinds of activities that introduce nudity into a minor or a environment, skinny dipping, those things become problematic whenever it begins to be an issue with a college kid or somebody introducing something like that into the program of the minors, and then obviously it gets exploded out of sometimes context, but nevertheless, it's something that does happen across the country in many different camp cultures that is needing to be quickly extinguished. Child grooming, obviously the process of attracting kids and bringing them into an isolated situation, and the use of child pornography. Obviously, this also includes sexting. And I'll just tell you that across the country, law enforcement officials still do not know what to do with sexting. We've reported multiple from several youth organizations that I work with, and yet there is no path to prosecution. They don't really know how it fits in the statutory language in many respects. And so we're left with an unsubstantiated criminal act that nothing got done about. And then you guys are left to pick up the pieces because both the perpetrator and the victim may be in the same program, and he or she are being inappropriate, and yet the law enforcement can't do anything, and parents are looking at you guys to say, well, what are you going to do about it? So you have to come to an understanding of how your zero tolerance policy is going to play out. Well, episodes of child sex abuse are always going to include three types of people, or three groups of people. Obviously the abusers, because they're trying to pursue kids; victims, because those are the ones they're pursuing. But in every instance I've ever investigated or watched or read the transcript, bystanders saw something. You never see abuse in 99% of the cases, but you see something strange, something uncomfortable, something isolation, some words, some innuendo. So there's always something suspicious. They just don't know what to do about it. We're going to take a look at some statistics just to kind of round out some perspective to help us see maybe what the potential problem is going to be. If you have the handout, you can fill in these blanks. I'll certainly send this PowerPoint to Dennison and Pastor Tracy, and they can share with you if you don't have your pen handy and ready to write it down however you want. It is a global problem, as you see here with these statistics all around. You've probably seen these across the U.S. for 1 in 4 girls or 1 in 6 boys. I see different ones. I see 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 7 boys. I see them all. I'm like, okay, well, where are these coming from? Well, the DOJ recently said about 28% of girls and 16% of boys before they reach age 18 are sexually molested in some way. Not always physical, could be pornographic, could be verbal, but nevertheless, that's a pretty significant amount of people. Before we actually catch predators, they will have an average of 117 victims before prosecution, if we are able to get a prosecution. Guys, this is just crazy. When we think of this, if you break it down into genders, usually it's about 150 males are sexually molested before we catch the predator, on average, 150. If it's a female victim category, it's about 52 females would be molested before we actually catch the person. So we're not talking about the guy, you see on the news, he got 8 counts or 5 counts or whatever. This is actually numbers coming from studies done when they polygraph predators in prison to try to find out, well, how many people did you do something inappropriate to? It's a large quantity of people that have been impacted. So much so that it's actually 10 times higher than the rate of cancer. I mean, it's epidemic, but you certainly don't see any politicians running on the ticket to say, I will end child abuse. That is not the case. So therefore, the deviancy of child sexual activity not only is allowed to continue with some measures to try to combat it, it's actually promoted in many different. The American Medical Association wrote published a recent article allowing for the natural relationship, the natural sexual relationship between an adult and a child. So nevertheless, we are not in a society that is no longer looking necessarily down at the act of having a child sex partner. They're actually somewhat promoting it at some of the highest levels. If you're waiting on a lot of money to come to our federal or your states as it relates to child protection, you're going to be shocked, not only years ago when they ran these studies, but even more recently, cancer, and it's tragic. Cancer is tragic, but other threats and other problems are going to always outweigh the ability for funding to land in your state or the federal government to be able to stand up a more robust child protection system. And even if they did, it would be problematic to execute that across the spectrum of all youth-serving organizations, even so. As I said, about a quarter of all reports end up with a juvenile being the perpetrator. So that's problematic when we look at trying to protect kids from not only adults, but other children. The most at-threat group is the kids 11 and under. And of those, the molester, 50% of the time could be a juvenile or 50 adult. So again, you're trying to figure out how to create ratios and watch kids when they're out in play, and they could be in the woods or in the lake or wherever. There's problematic ways of us trying to figure out how do we create enough supervision, eyes on, so we do not end up in a situation. And the impact of abuse continues. Here you find out that 95% of teenage prostitutes were sexually abused. The ACE study done in 1998 said that if your adverse childhood experience score was over 4, and you can Google this at some point, it's called the ACE study, ACE, then your prevalence of hepatitis and injected drug use and alcoholism and suicide were astronomically off the charts based on the amount of adverse experiences you had as a child, of which physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse are a large part of that adverse experience. Our job is monumental to protect kids, not only those coming into our programs who are experiencing this back home, and then they come into our camps and trying to find someone to help, but also trying to prevent it from happening inside of our organizations. Well, obviously the revenue cost, or rather the cost expense across the country to deal with this is rather high. 124 billion is just the estimate. But nevertheless, this money is not finding its way back to prevention. It's merely the nation's best effort to try to deal with all the litigation, all the counseling, all the social services, trying to deal with a population of people, 28% of girls and 16% of boys, that are dealing with and going through abusive situations. The last slide I got at one of the national conferences not long ago, when they said, how big is the child pornographic ring? In other words, the transmission of child pornography. Michael Burke was with the U.S. Marshal's Office, and he said in a 30-day study, over 2.2 million IP addresses downloaded more than 100 child pornographic images. These are the serious pornographic individuals, not just the incidental, hit a wrong button. These are the people seeking out, and over 2 million IP addresses did it. They also ran a sting in San Antonio, found a husband and wife couple that were running a child pornographic website in the deep dark web, is what they call it. And they were trafficking in images, videos. They were depositing $2 million a month into their business account. They were also doing live pay-per-view child abuse on the internet website. I know sometimes we get shielded, and this information is a little overwhelming, I think, in some regards to stomach and to take. But we as youth-serving organizations serving a population of kids have to deal with certain other realities. We got kids coming in with eating disorders, kids coming in with some ADHD, kids coming in with some other diabetic or medical condition or mental health issue. We also have kids coming in that are right in the middle of being impacted in some deviant way, and they're going to spend a week with us. And there's something that we get to do to hopefully help deliver them from some of this. I talked about the ACE study. Just throw it up. I would recommend you Google it just to better understand what this study is about. It's over 400,000 test subjects that were adults. The idea was basically to say, did you have any of these happen to you as a kid? And because of it, is there something changed about your adult life? Interestingly, what you find out, whereas most abuses occur in the home by a parent or non-parent partner in the home, sexual abuse 40% of the time happens out of the home. What that tells you and I is we have got to be on guard, because people are trying to get jobs in camps, churches, schools, daycare, zoos, or whatever, not with the sole intent to isolate children. and perpetrate. Well, as the outcome said, basically with an A score of 4 or more, the percentages go drastically high of people trying to cope with the adverse things that happen to them as children, up to and including suicide simply to escape it. I'll reiterate what I heard at a national conference with some people that speak before Congress, and they basically said youth organizations are essential to combat lack of parenting, to combat other deviances, because we are the ones that probably care the most about children in a positive and healthy way. So I applaud what you guys are doing. Do more of it and fight the good fight. Well, the abuser realities, we have to understand any threat, whether it's lightning or drowning or pit bulls. We have to understand it with which to then know what to do about it. It is, in this case, sexual abuse. It's an adult male over 85 to 90% of the time, so it's largely driven by the male gender. Of those actually investigated for an allegation of abuse, only 3 to 5% are actually prosecuted. Sounds pretty low. It's probably more alarming when you actually think that your background screen actually was a good thing you did, or that it would produce great results about deviancy. But the reality of it is, the majority of people investigated never get into a database of which you would have never found a record anyway, because of the lack of the lack of successful criminal prosecution. You know, I grew up with stranger danger, Saturday morning cartoons. We had it all wrong. Now, granted, strangers could be dangerous. In the world of child sexual abuse, over 90% of the time, it's going to be an acquaintance, someone we know, someone we love, someone we trust. And so therefore, we have to find a way how to protect kids when we actually have to be suspicious about each other. That's kind of hard to do until you actually do what is necessary. And that's to say, why don't we all just say we're mutually accountable to each other? Once we land in a space that allows us to be mutually accountable, to call each other on the table, that begins actually a process toward a culture that is ready to engage or to step into a space where there may be someone who showed up, who passed all the stuff, who's in here, but their intent may still be to pursue kids. That's where we eventually have to get to. Contrary to popular belief, abusers, predators are usually married as they progress to adulthood. They usually marry someone of the opposite gender. They usually have kids. So when they first start molesting or abusing others, they're usually age 14 on average. So now you can see why that peer-to-peer is a problem. These are not 14-year-olds who are attracted to, in their post-puberty, to other 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds and progressing along the same natural path. These are kids who actually set up little kids, 5-year-olds and 7 and 10s. And they want to isolate them and want to then do something sexual to them. A lot of that is exploratory, according to Barbara Bonner. Some of them are just interested in their bodies and other kids' bodies, but these kids actually take it too far and begin to then perpetrate against. And that's where it jumps the line of what curiosity would say, as we were all curious back then. Now it's gone into a deviancy position here, of which you and I have to make sure we're safeguarding these little kids from 14 to, young offenders. A couple of slides just to say, hey, we got kind of a problem. 1 to 2% of the male population will be convicted. 5 to 10% of adult males have molested children. Interesting study here, because this kind of peels it back a little bit and said, hey guys, it's not 250 guys with trench coats on and candy at the playground. This isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about, well, there's 114 million adult men in America. And if a couple of these studies are even close, the people that are perpetrating or trying to isolate and perpetrate against kids falls in the category of somewhere between 5 and 10 million adult men. All right, let's just say they're off a couple percent. Let's say we have 2 to 5 million. Guys, I'm saying we have way too many people that have a sexual preference in children that could land in you and I as church, camp, school, whatever, with the sole intent of just simply isolating kids. And Google your hometown or Google your county, and you'll find out how many files are actually on the prosecutor's desk right now, even in your own county, which makes this probably a little more realistic. Well, some other things you guys know about grooming, or you should know. These are people that actually do a lot of stuff to attract kids. They take on hobbies that attract kids. They may actually refer to children in probably an inappropriate, descriptive way. I have 5 kids, and none of them are pure or innocent. Never have been. They were born. I mean, 2-year-olds, they're pretty evil. I mean, they want what they want. And they don't care what they're going to do to get it. So I agree they're from God, but still there's a lot of work that needs done. Molesters, by definition, have to be able to justify something in their own mind to be able to then perpetrate illegally against a child. They do this in some interesting ways. One is to just refer to a kid and see them in their mind as something completely different. The world has preferential molesters, and they do prefer things like a certain age of kid, a certain gender of kid. Some of the ones I researched, they preferred blonde kids. Some preferred happy kids. There's no way for the FBI to actually profile this. So you and I are left with doing our next best effort, because there's no way to profile or see it coming as it relates to preference or non-preferential. The hardest part is they just want to be trusted. They want to be exemplary. They want to develop a persona of goodness. Why? Because they want us and need us to trust them. Be quite honest with you, on this page that you see here, I'm about 60 to 70% here. I'm a guy. I don't molest kids, but you don't know that because now you don't even trust me. I'm an acquaintance in most of the places that I work, at Kanakuk, at church, my kids' little league. I'm married, got kids. I groom people. I groom kids. I've been paid to groom kids, not sexually. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't sign off yet, because I want to explain that. I've been paid in a lot of different of my roles in the past to attract kids to come to my church, camp, school, or whatever. And what did we use? Sports, video games, music, attention. There's a lot of things I've done on here for my own kids, for kids in my community, kids in my program, hobbies. I've done toy collecting or building models. So the message I'm trying to say is you can't just go off this page and say, oh, I know somebody that kids really love and he does a lot of kid stuff, so I'm curious and suspicious. You can't do that, because a lot of jobs are actually directed to make sure that you do this. So it becomes more problematic as you're trying to profile. Well, a couple more statistics. Women aren't off the hook. 4% said they've had a sexual experience with a minor under 5 years old. 6% of college kids were more attracted to children than teens. 10.4% of adults expressed a sexual interest in prepubescent children, and 19% of adults said they would engage with children sexually if they were sure they wouldn't be punished. I think we can all agree, whether the statistics are 5% plus or minus or whatever, is we have a sexual deviancy problem in America. Some people are sexually deviant against their own gender, a different adult, whatever. There's a percentage of them that are exploiting kids, pure and simple. And our job is to not ignore that. Our job is to understand there is a problem, and there's no way to completely fix the problem. So we have to be on our guard every day, making sure that we acknowledge that every time I open the doors of camp or church or school or whatever, that someone could try to pursue. Segregation used to be kind of a tool used. That's why Boy Scouts are boys, Girl Scouts are girls. That might fix something. We obviously know now that segregation doesn't work. 36% would use either one. And so that was not a tool that fixed it. Pornography continues to be used 25% of the time. In this study, 50% actually showed it to their victims to do barrier reductive type of things, verbal barrier reductions, physical barrier reductions, and then, of course, showing pornography. And some take pictures or videos of their victims while they're doing it. From a prosecutory standpoint, we don't keep them in prison forever. So 700,000 have been reported released. They've lost about 80 to 100,000 of those because, I mean, who's keeping track of them, and how much capacity do our parole officers have to track these people down and make them follow the rules? By the way, the recidivism of a released sex offender is 50%. So 350,000 of these statistically would reoffend out in the system. 93% self-describe themselves as religious people. Some say churches provide cheap grace, gullible religious people, easy to access kids. That's kind of true in schools even. We're a trusting humanity. You have to trust. I mean, how are you going to teach a class unless principals give you trust? So we have to trust to some degree. Oregon, I don't know what's going on in Oregon. It's the second highest percentage up there, but 1 in 84 men is a registered sex offender. Your state has a similar percentage, which again alludes to these other things to say we have a problem, folks, and we don't need to ignore the problem. We need to step into that space. Of the people that we're counting on to fix this problem, bystanders are the ones we would say, we need you there. But in this study of 197 teachers, if they knew that abuse was happening in a family situation, only 26 would report it. If they knew a teacher was the one that was abusing, only 11% would report it. Well, that's a pretty big problem we have because they justify their way out of getting involved. Even on the National Crime Survey, when someone was actually being victimized, they said, while I was being victimized, bystanders were doing nothing to help or hurt it 48% of the time, and actually doing something to hurt it 10% of the time. So we as bystanders still are not responding well. And 52% of offenders reported that children told people discovered, no one contacted authorities. We've just got to find a way to equip us as bystanders to really do a better job, because we're the only ones here that statistically have the responsibility and the desire to step in and help kids. We just got to know what to do. Well, to help me understand it, guys, because not only have I taught about this, not only have I done lawsuits, litigation, and everything else, I've also worked with two abusers, which I was fooled. So how do I couch this in my mind? As I understand it, I want to hire wise people. I believe in Proverbs saying that if you correct a wise person, they change. I like wise people, don't you? I just want people with lots of humility to just do great ministry, great work, and really honor children and respect them. But I don't know about you, but I hire some foolish people every year. And now I hire college kids, so they they come in to do a lot of our camps, and college kids are college kids, and sometimes they just don't know better. Foolish people can actually be trained and encouraged to become wise in time. But what I fear the most is that we've hired an evil person, because an evil person does not act like a foolish person. Evil people act like wise people because they know we will not give you access to children if you continually act foolish. And foolish people do according to what their flesh desires, regardless of whether it's right, wrong, criminal, or not. That's the hardest threat to figure out. Are these evil people here for one intent, but they act like a wise person? The last video I watched of a school teacher in California, he said, I interviewed 6 school districts. Did you hear what he said? He took the job at the school district that he interviewed, not they interviewed him, he interviewed them to identify whether they knew anything about child protection or not. And that's where he didn't care about the pay. He didn't care about the benefits. He only wanted to go there to perpetrate against kids. He's evil, acting wise, and then they set up shop in there. Well, I don't know about you, but the FBI says that you and I are never going to know by just looking at people or even watching them. We're probably not going to see it, not going to notice it. And this is the FBI study on the behavioral relationship of molesters, and how you and I are not going to know. In fact, as you and I look around this slide, which one of these would you pick? Now that I've been talking to you, you're like, oh, it's probably the guy that looks normal, looks like me, maybe, or it's definitely not the female, because so there's a lot of misconceptions as you and I bounce around. We may look at someone like the Catholic gentleman there and say, well, because he's Catholic, well, that's a misconception too, because he's not a child molester. You and I have to kind of peel back a little bit and say it could be all sizes, shapes, all ages, even all genders that we have to perceive. Now we have to figure out, how do I trust anybody in my organization? And that's going to be the trick as we implement more moving down the road, because it can be done. And by the way, you can still have fun in the process. Well, Richard Creech is not the author that you want to build from. He's not that author to say, here's the great way to help a kid in camp to realize themselves and find out about their faith. He wrote a book that has been published. I'll just put it up and give you a second to read it, and I'll take a drink. Guys, this is a how-to book. It's a training book. 200 pages of how to fool you in your camp, how to fool you as a mom and dad, how to access your kids in the church, camp, school, daycare, out on the street. Talks about really how to date single parents only to get access to their children. Really what I've come to an understanding, we found this book, by the way, in two of the last investigations that they did. One was in South Florida, one was in Washington, where a copy of this was sitting in the car. They found it in the car, the molester trying to molest and not get caught. That's a how-to book. We've got to be better than this. Our process, our programs have to be better than the book, because the guys are reading the book and they're learning how to fool us. Well, we thought back in '93 background checks were going to be the solution. They were going to just give us the silver bullet with which to really win. And MSNBC just basically lets you and I know these truths: spotty participation, different data formats. The Fair Credit Reporting Act is only going to go back 7 years. Different definitions, different crimes. May not include federal crimes, and may only include convictions. I put may in there because if you do a personal investigation at the courthouse, you can find arrest records, but your reporting entities doing background screening have to follow rules, and part of that is they should only be able to go back 7 years to protect the incarcerated person and allow them to hopefully get a job someday. But they're only reporting on convictions as well, which means that only 3 to 5% of the people investigated actually have a record with which to find. So really your background check is really only doing one thing. That's to say, does the person I'm checking had the unfortunate experience to actually get prosecuted, because it's really hard to get prosecuted. What you have to do is you have to do them. So if you're not doing them, it's the standard care of duty to do background screening on every volunteer, every employee that comes into access and control with children. So just to understand that across the country, that's the lowest minimum hurdle on background screening. My recommendation, as soon as you do the background check, don't expect that it told you whether this person is deviant or not, because that's not what it said. That's not the outcome of that. It just says, is there a knowable recorded record that you could find? Why? Because 41% is the error rate in the records themselves, according to the CEO of IntelliSense. Again, this is not a perfect system. It never was intended to be. It's a tool. It's a tool to use. Once you do it, understand you've really proven nothing less other than I could not find a recorded record. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. In my longer seminar, I can tell you I've done it, and I found people that had convictions and they weren't on any database, and yet they were right here in my county with a recorded sex offender. In fact, the U.S. Marshal's Office says for you to actually get your name on a criminal background report, all of these steps have to happen. And they're research steps that actually have things to do. And before you get your list on the thing, 84% of this whole process falls apart right there. So it's not surprising why we simply do not have a really good system yet to investigate, prosecute, document, database, and report on database with which you and I can then hire. And if you don't know anything about Ban the Box, write it down right now after we get off, because I know you're going to want to spend more time in this today because this is such a riveting topic. Ban the Box is creating a method for you and I, for it to be illegal for you and I to check the background of a person before we make a hiring decision. It's banning our ability to recognize convicted people, preventing us from not hiring him and then putting him into accessing control with children. It's going to be difficult for us, and they're making it more difficult. Well, there's an example of the child molestation instruction manual surfacing in Orange County. Just to give you an idea, this isn't just stuff that's not happening. It's real. It's out there. There's organizations like this that are actually shuffling that work around. It's the online voice of the North American Man-Boy Love Association. Yes, they do exist. Yes, they do get together. Yes, they do share the book. They share pictures. They share pornography. They share everything that has to do about legalizing the sexual relationship between a man and a boy. There are probably a dozen such organizations that exist to promote the sexualization of a child. Well, I think what we can all agree to at this point is if we just knew the difference between a youth program and molestation, you and I would probably be able to tell it pretty quickly and solve it, right? So here's the biggest differences I can come up with. Why? Because this is what you and I see. We see effective relationship building, and that's what we are led to believe is happening in all these relationships. Trust, kindness, confidence. Guys, it's the same thing, because early on molestation has nothing to do except relationship development, which actually they do it very well because people have 117 average victims. So they must be likable. They must have confidence. They must be trusted. So as you and I then go past this, you say, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, we can understand a few things about it. Stranger abusers are not the biggest problem. We're going to continue to do that. So it's really the people inside the program that are molesting most of the kids. Now we need to navigate what we're going to do about it. Acquaintance abusers really begin to methodically isolate kids in two different ways. Either they'll do it opportunistically. In other words, they didn't groom a kid for a year or 6 months. They didn't set up a kid for weeks. Basically, they just found themselves in an isolated situation and decided to monopolize on it. Well, that's why we have to make sure opportunistic people aren't able to molest or aren't able to isolate kids in our programs. Groomers, on the other hand, are the people that are in it to win it. They're in it to fool you as a dad or mom. They spend time doing that. They'll go overboard to do that. They'll try to persuade and fool the youth workers, the administration, the kids. They're the ones spending a lot of vacations and a lot of after hours and a lot of weekends above and beyond the call in many respects to try to be interacting with kids and families. Most of us are like, man, that guy's a rock star. Look how much time he's spending. And maybe he is. Maybe he's the best thing happened, but maybe there's another effort going on. So there's part of that just makes you suspicious. Well, groomers are the ones that have long-term relationship with kids, which can be devastating because the abuse gets worse and worse. It worsens in severity. Trust is the access point. They have to have trust, and we have to give people trust to be able to work with kids. Otherwise, schools and camps wouldn't exist. Well, we've kind of identified 3 ways that we think people are sliding or moving into this level of trust. The first one we call sliders. Sliders are people that take positions in youth organizations that are not in direct oversight of children. Maintenance guy, deacon, cook. These are people that are probably not going to be hired as a youth pastor, coach, teacher, or whatever, because they're not qualified. So they will be a part of the organization so that they can develop trust within their role that they're serving, and then they make themselves available. A lot of the guys I see, I had a deacon molest some kids in the South as a deacon. Why? They never did a background check on him. They never did anything. Why? Because he was a deacon. Had they done it, they would actually found out he was a convicted child molester from the Northeast. But he slid over as a deacon. And then the other guy in another organization, he slid over just to help out transport kids home from the bowling alley. That's a way to develop trust without actually being approved. Emergers are just people that come up within the ranks of the program. Sometimes grandpa is the one that's trusted, or dad. So thus we trust the son or the grandson or whatever. But they've never done anything to be trustworthy. A lot of camps actually have that because we have a lot of long-term people that built the camp, served in the camp. Grandpa started the camp. Grandsons are here. Granddaughters are here. Oftentimes we kind of just give people trust when they themselves haven't really earned it. And of course, the last one of the people that seek positions as the coach, teacher, parent, because they want the position of control. They want to have access. They want to have control. They want to own that. And if they can, then they will just perpetrate until the water gets hot and they can move on or get caught. Well, the grooming stages, as Dr. Mike kind of filled out for us look kind of much like relationship building there. Target victims, gain trust, fill need, and isolate. None of this is illegal, by the way. Nobody's going to say, hey, he's gaining trust with mom and dad or with the organization. He needs to be investigated. So none of this is really triggering anybody to have any problems. Well, this is what you and I see, though. In fact, isolation is actually healthy. It's positive. I mean, how many of us have taken private lessons to learn piano or private sporting lessons to learn tennis or something like that? So, or even discipleship or mentoring one-on-one. It is a productive way to help young kids, but it's also the way these guys isolate justifiably and then begin to perpetrate. The problem is nobody actually perpetrates until they're isolated. And when they're isolated, then nobody's telling. Kids aren't telling. 40 years of research basically suggests that kids won't tell. And then they maintain control, which is very effective. That's why they can have 150 male victims when nobody talking, because they're able to control the child to the extent until, of course, the child ages out and they begin. In the meantime, though, we've got to come up with ways to prevent. What's failed us over the years is mandatory reporting. Well, why? Because, 89% of public school teachers wouldn't do it. Remember, only 11% would. Mandatory reporting isn't fixing it. Even if they get reported, 3 to 5% get prosecuted? Even when they get prosecuted, 50% recidivism rate when they get out. So you see, the system's not fixing deviant sexual behavior toward children. It simply isn't. So we're going to talk about a 3-stage prevention plan. And I know I'm going super fast, so I appreciate you guys holding on, buckled in for the ride. But I just want to make sure I peel back and give you some things to think about as you continue to advance your protection plan. Well, the first one has to do with the behavior map. Well, every predator is going to behave properly for you to give him trust. So don't think that, I'm going to find him because he's the guy always breaking the rules. That's simply not the case. They're actually going to do the rules, so you'll trust him. While he's doing the rules, he's actually going to be trying to find the weak link in your system. Well, that's what he's going to do. And if he decides that you are kind of a weakling when it comes to holding the rules, now he's found weak link that your rules don't really mean anything. Anyway, he's going to try to do that on his way to perpetrating or creating something illegal. Your state's going to define what's illegal over there in the red zone, but he's kind of got to get through your systems first to be able to perpetrate that. Sometimes that takes 5 minutes and sometimes it takes 6 months. Just depends on the setting. As he's going and walking down this path, he's actually doing that grooming process if he's a grooming molester. He's targeting kids, he's gaining trust, he's exploring your weak spots in your program. Well, by the time we hit this threshold, guys, it's important that you and I have a system in place to create a remedy. If you and I can't remedy it by then, what happens is he gets isolated. And when he gets isolated, he's one-on-one with a kid. Well, history shows, research provides support that kids usually lose. It's not a violent rape situation. That's not what we're talking about in child sexual abuse. It's not a kid who's screaming loud. Otherwise, we would respond immediately, right? We would run to that kid. We would safeguard that kid. This is a known, loved, and trusted individual who happened to introduce sexuality to a kid. Kid does not know how to mentally navigate that. And so therefore it goes on before a kid, even your kid, is able to really reconcile that and say something's up. Not without training, not without some of us telling it's okay to come to us and tell us something. In fact, your jobs, quite honestly, will be used against you, as will mine. Wes Stafford was a missionary kid. His abuser said, if you tell, your dad will lose his job and it'll be your fault. You see, kids can't navigate that kind of complexities. So basically, he was noble taking the abuse to save his dad's job. Well, I wish we could say success meant that abuse would never happen. And that's true. That would be great. But in our deviant society where this is, again, 25% of our youth population, I would suggest to you that there's a couple of things that we definitely can accomplish that are reasonable. Number one, try never to hire someone who has a predatory nature toward kid. Either screen them out or get them to opt out or monitor them out before they perpetrate. But nevertheless, we've got to try to do something that's doable and reasonable, sustainable, and affordable. Or if they happen to get into your program, create the kind of culture that basically says you try something with a kid, you will get caught, you will get prosecuted and punished. Now, that kind of culture exists. I've seen it in organizations. It's not an eggshell kind of culture, but it is one to say we take kid protection super serious. Research has proven they will molest at those organizations, but in yours, somehow they didn't. Why? Because they said, I think I would have gotten caught. It does work. After abuse begins to occur, success looks like this is basically we have to be able to respond immediately to reduce frequency, to reduce severity. We don't need to sit on that topic for a long time, talk about it over the weekend. Guys, we need to have an immediate response to suspicions of engaging local enforcement to come in and investigate, follow up, do what we can. That's how we're going to do it on that side. Obviously, we want to make it a fair fight, but in order to do so, we got to rally here somewhere. There's a sea of information out there that you can get lost in. Well, here's kind of how we kind of capsulize this to make it more understandable in more of a shorter period of time, because people, volunteers and adults, employees even, kind of get lost, especially parents. We're trying to rally people around basically a 3 R's: recognize, resist, report mentality. If you don't do a stop, drop, and roll kind of training or thing, people are just overwhelmed with information. They're not going to remember the 5 pages of stuff or the 2 hours of stuff. It's like, it's too much. All right, can you remember recognize, resist? Yeah, I can remember that. I can get that. Okay, so we're going to drive down this. In lieu, we're trying to really accomplish 4 remedies in all of the things we do, the 340 protection elements. We're trying to screen people out, which you are too. That's wise. Background screen, work verification reference. The FBI says is we're going to be lucky in the screen out, but we're still going to do it if we can. Number 2, guys, we can do this all day long. Your websites are important. Molesters look at your websites to see if you have anything there. First off, to see if you're an easy organization. My website is in your face when it comes to child protection. So if you're looking at an easy targeted organization, I think you should think twice about Kanakuk, because guess what? It's all over our website. You see it, and this means we would be less targeted by a professional. We want them to also opt out internally if they happen to get in. My teams are trained, and I suggest you too, to monitor out not abuse, because nobody really ever sees abuse. You need to monitor out a violation of your code of conduct. You're not following what we ask you to follow as you behave with kids. We're not going to wait to find out if there's something going on there. We're going to let you go on your way now. That's a little different than it used to be to say mandatory report. Why? Because by then it's too late. Obviously, report out is exactly that. Kids told us he's being abused internally, externally, and we're going to respond to it now so that we can address it. Well, I showed you this before. We talked about mandatory reporting as being the preventive option that America's doing. Well, we've changed it around. We believe that sin gets contemplated in the mind first. That's why Romans says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, we think that's where this begins, is I'm considering sexualizing children. Well, we want you to think about that, and we actually insert in our training opportunities for you to go, hey, some of you may be thinking this, because 5 to 10% of adult men do to some degree. So guess what? If you're here and that's a thought you're having, we're gonna ask you to think about that and then think about leaving. I've had 10 guys leave youth programming in the last 5 years because they were struggling with something deviant, pornography, sexually addictive nature. You know, most of them actually came, and not to me, but they came to our director's team or another organization that I actually worked with, and they said, I don't need to be in a cabin with kids. They didn't tell us they were sexually attracted to them. They just said, based on what's going on in my life, I don't need to be in a cabin. You know, I didn't fix their problem. I'm not here to rehab people struggling with deviancy or pornography as adults. That's not why we exist. We're a youth program, but I appreciated their honesty. And they also, one guy said, I appreciate you actually giving me a path. And we actually send them down a path of counseling, if they choose to do so, to actually send them to a place not to act upon the thoughts that are going on in their head. Well, if we can't fix it there, guys, our second is on the method. If you violate code of conduct, we're going to dismiss you, whether you're delivering bread, whether you're a construction worker on my site, whether you're a staff guy, or whether you're the executive director. If we monitor these things happening and it falls outside of this, accountability, it goes from the president down. And so we've all accepted that, we've all adopted that, and we're all willing to call it on the table, peer to peer, adult to child, doesn't matter. We're going to push in and we're going to report out as well, should anything need reported. So we have 3 phases of prevention. We're hoping to really land in the first 2 so that we never have to report that a kid was impacted ever again in our watch. There's some other things that kind of flesh this out. I won't go into great detail here. It's on my website and certainly in some of the paper you have. We kind of start with a military approach, if you will, to say, let's try to resolve it 2 miles out, 1 mile out, half a mile out. And then if we have to, we're going to try to equip the child. And we have training for children. We show our video, which is available to you guys. Dennison can send it. I'll send him a link if you choose to use it. It really teaches anywhere from 6-year-olds up to 18-year-olds what to do if you're uncomfortable or something does not seem safe and healthy. Never talks about abuse. It doesn't introduce kids to verbs or verbiage that is inappropriate. Guys, we used to report 4 to 5 abuse cases a summer before all this. Now we report 40 to 50. Now, that's not happening here at Kanakuk. What it's doing is because we show the video, we're telling kids we're here to protect them in a healthy way. Guess what? Kids they're impacted. They always were. It's just now they're like, hey, that's me. And apparently you want to help me. It's the hardest ministry I've ever been a part of, but it's probably the most fulfilling. We have a very large system in the Kanakuk CPP. That's why it takes an Army to roll it out. That's why it takes departments. That's why we have massive training going on at the food service level, the maintenance guy level, the registrar level, the kid level, the director level. So we've kind of mapped this out in our CPP to kind of, again, give people the resources and tools to learn what we've learned, certainly, some through bad experiences, but also to elevate and advance your own child protective measures across the spectrum of all of these management fields so that you can also have a balanced approach, because you can be really good in background screening and still miss it. You can be really good in staffing or really good in supervision, but you really need a balanced approach across all of these to do well in the prevention of it. Whew! I don't know about you, but I'm going to take a drink. I talked way too long. You guys look like you've seen a ghost, but nevertheless, I'm excited to be here. And the sun is now moving to my right, so you see it shining off my head because that's where my basement window is. So, I'm all ears for any questions that you may have.
Awesome. All right, Rick, while we're waiting for more questions to come in, I've got a couple here that have come in. You know, you've said a lot of discouraging things about background checks. Are you advocating not doing background checks?
I never said that, and I would never stand on that. As I said, it is in some of your states, it is mandatory law that you do them. And even if it's not mandatory law, it is the national standard of care to background screen your volunteers and employees working with kids. If you do not do it and they call me to be an expert witness on your litigation case, that would not be good for you. Okay? You have to do a screen because you cannot allow a convicted child molester to be in your program. He can't be the maintenance guy. I'm just saying, hey, listen, there's a lot of things those guys can do, but to be in a youth program with access and control to kids, the only way to know that or to confirm that you tried to know that is to do a background screen. Do it. Don't expect that to actually tell you if there's any other deviancy going on in that person's life, because there are so many errors in the whole system. Move on and do something more tangible.
Sure. I feel like I know what you're going to say to this, but someone's kind of wanting to know, it seems like, how do you feel about background checks versus fingerprinting?
Do everything you can and afford. In Colorado, you have to do fingerprinting because the Child Care Act in Colorado mandates for Colorado residents working with kids mandatory fingerprinting. Again, don't expect fingerprinting because they're all still working off of court repositories of convicted status. So don't expect necessarily. Now, in some cases, I'm not speaking broadly of every jurisdiction, but fingerprinting is still going to go off of the same court repositories that most other background screening company or results are coming from.
So it seems like it's a professionally accepted thing that you do if that's your state requirement, but it's still kind of in the same boat. You're only going to find the people that have been caught.
Correct. Now, some states have what's called a central registry, which you may have access to. By and large, though, youth organizations across the country, and I'm talking the greater population, do not run fingerprints because that is not the general standard of care, but some states require it. So definitely check with your state as it relates to the regulations revolving around this whole thing of background check, fingerprint, sex offender check in that respect. By the way, there's two national sex offender registries. One is the Drew Sojourn Registry. One is the National Registry. I'm still confused after 28 years which one I'm supposed to check and why they're different. Why can't we just have one? So anyway, I'm still confused. That's my official position.
Okay. I got another question here that's come in. What main markers do you look for when you're hiring staff to try and mitigate the risk of hiring potential abusers?
Oh, wow. Markers. Yeah, applications have questions that we've developed through great experts to potentially see if there's a question asked on an application. What you're looking for essentially is didn't answer the question that I asked, moved around all the time, has gaps in their lives that are unaccounted for. None of the phone numbers, none of the emails actually connect you to supervisors that they say they work for. Yeah, so along the path of that, you can actually have yellow and red flags that kind of go, oh, I'm kind of seeing a pattern here. If you got a guy that has spent the last 20 years working with 8 to 10-year-old boys at 6 different organizations, we used to think he was a rock star. Now we think he's suspicious because he may be a preferential molester. That does not mean he is. What it does mean, though, is I'm going to call those 6 and ask if he was a rock star. And if they say yes, then I'm going to hire him because he probably is a rock star. But if those 6 say, no, he's gone and he's not eligible to rehire, then he's not a rock star. And I may be suspicious of putting him with my 8 to 10-year-old boys' cabins because, again, that's a yellow flag per se because there's nothing to help substantiate that 6 organizations would ask him back. It's like, whoa, that's concerning to me. There are red flags, there are yellow flags all along the spectrum of hiring, from application to reference to work history, volunteer history, interview, to the point of eligible. Then if you made it in, that doesn't mean you're not a molester. It just means now we're going to try to identify yellow, red flags in your behavior as it relates to the code of conduct as you work with kids.
Excellent. There's a question here. The average age of a camp counselor is typically 17 to 21. What do you think the percentage of finding an abuser by doing a background check within that age group would be?
Nil. 17s, number one, aren't going to have a screen that you can check because they're a minor and you will not have access to it. The probability that an 18 to 21-year-old actually has a criminal record by that age and is out of prison with which to apply to your job is probably minuscule. What you're likely to see most of the time in the 18 to 21-year-olds is streaking, opening a malt beverage, drunken driving. I mean, that's typically what we see. You may have a convicted child molester in that, but it's very rare that they actually have a conviction, are out of prison, and are applying for a job.
Sure. Okay, those of you who are here from the education field, if you want to send in questions, that would be fine too. You're more than welcome to. We've got another question here. With 85% of cases against people who are perpetrating against a kid breaking down at the reporting stage, how do you get kids to alert an adult of the problem?
Yeah, so the only way to alert them, in our opinion, was to train them. And so we created a 4.5-minute video that we show to 25,000 kids a year. We can't force them, just like, we can't force an adult, but we can encourage them and help them navigate it. They usually don't know how to navigate it, so therefore they're confused. So we show them the video, and in our CPP, Child Protection Plan, we actually do a strategic thing about halfway through our program. We show the video on day 1. Then halfway through the program, each kid gets a chance to have a short conversation with a leader that basically says, how's your experience? How's the food? How's the t-shirt? How is your schedule and your activities? Are you having a great camp experience? By the way, and here's the key question. And if you have kids at home, go home and ask your kids this tonight. Don't cry or anything. You'll freak them out or yell at them. But is there any person or thing that makes you feel unsafe or uncomfortable at school, camp, church, or whatever? Is there any person or thing that makes you feel unsafe or uncomfortable? We caught a 2011 abuser in camp because 4 days into the camp session, strategically, we watched the video on day one. 4 days later, we asked him that question, and it just so happened he said, yes. That counselor touched me in the private areas. See, we do that as a strategy to say, hey, if you make it into camp, make it into church, and halfway through the program, you want to try to engage kids, we're still on it. We're just still trying. So that's the question I ask my kids periodically. Well, the ones that are left here, the rest of them are gone. But
now, what have you discovered as far as like children false reporting? Do you have any statistics on that?
1 to 2% of reports are falsified in some way. 75% of what a kid tells you is actually probably some essence of truth.
Okay.
Well, of all reports, about 1 to 2 are fraudulent. That's why we encourage always 2 adults monitoring situations, because you don't need to one-on-one a bathroom break. You don't need to one-on-one a counseling session. You're putting your people in harm's way about fraudulent reporting with nobody to back it up. I don't want to put my Sunday school teachers, I don't want to put my camp counselors in that position. Because it does happen. I worked a case in Washington, D.C., American University, exactly that fraudulent report. 3 years after the guy was in prison, she finally said, I made it up. Okay. That happens, but it's only 1 to 2% of the time. When a kid reports to you, remember 75% of it, there's true. There's about 75% of what he says is probably true.
I'm going to play, I think I found the video that you were talking about, but it's going to take me a second. I'm just going to play the beginning of it and you let me know if that's the right video.
Okay. Yep. That's it.
Okay. So I've put the link to that video in the chat box. That's it right there. It's actually been uploaded by Rick. So it's talking about safe and secure orientation video is the title of it. It's one that could be actually used pretty much anywhere, if I remember right.
Yeah, has no Kanakuk in it, has no name dropping in it, has no logos in it. In fact, it's been viewed over 6,000 times, not by those individuals, because a lot of camps, churches, schools are actually using it to show hundreds of kids in their gymnasiums and their school classes and whatnot. So it's being used as basically a presentation model, and it's very generic. I voted for me to be the actor in it, but they didn't let me.
Voice made for radio. Is that what you're saying?
Apparently more Zoom, apparently.
A face made for radio.
Face made for radio. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you and me. I think we could have a good radio station.
I love it.
So this would be something that you could play, or you could get your own staff to make a video like this that would help your kids understand it's okay to say something. Yeah. If I don't feel something's going right.
Yeah, absolutely. I can even send you the script of what we use, and you can change the scripted language to fit you, shoot it on a green screen, do whatever you want. We have about a dozen or so that I've seen organizations make. They're on our website. If the website is kind of broken right now, it's still kind of, we're working on it. But yeah, there's some great examples out there what other organizations have created to train their kids with.
Cool. Hey, I sat with you for 8 hours at Big Cedar Lodge in Branson and went through a full day of training.
Yeah.
And I know we had people online. If people have sat here and said, I've listened to the stats, we need to do something at our camp to really buckle down and do more. Do you guys offer additional training or like something like that people could join online? Do you have any information about a program like that?
Yeah, we do 2 8-hour seminars a year where we actually basically teach you exactly what I just did, as well as what is the entire child protection plan that Kanakuk puts on the field. We give you a 135-page handbook. We take you through the entire plan, all the resources, anything that either we developed or others developed and said it's shareable will be sent to you as a participant in that training. With that, whoever attends from your camp or organization will then be able to go back, analyze. There's a self-assessment in there. You can analyze where are we already doing good and where are our gaps, and then where can we find a resource within the CPP to possibly shore up that gap to better protect kids. So that's coming up. We do one every November in Branson, which I highly recommend. It was a pretty good lunch, Dennison, if I do say so. Big Cedar Lodge.
It was.
If we're going to talk about this topic, we're going to have a good lunch. We're going to have a Big Cedar Lodge experience. Late March, with all this COVID kindness going around, we'll probably turn that into a Zoom day and still be able to do one. So just continue to monitor our website for what that might look like coming up in March or early April.
And I just put a link to what I believe is the page to watch for that. It's kanakukchildprotection.org/training. We just want to watch that page, and that's where we would want to go to see if there was more information and to sign up for that class.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Rick, I think we've reached the end of our time. I'm sitting here in the attic of my father-in-law's house because I think sometimes we think, there's a certain way that child molesters look, or they're kind of creepy. They're like the maintenance guy, and we associate things. But today, I mean, the dangers are everywhere. So thanks for coming here and just starting us thinking more about more things. Any places you would suggest we look if we want more resources on shoring up what we're doing, or the child protection plan that Kanakuk has?
Yeah, so obviously we're running a play here with our strategy, our tactics. You're welcome to tie along with that. There's another organization, it's out of Canada. For some of you Canadian folks out there, it's called Plan to Protect, Melody Bissell, running a great program up there. So I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to Melody. I serve on a national task force with the Evangelical Council on Abuse Prevention called ECAP. We are developing a accreditation process for evangelical organizations to get accredited on child abuse prevention through the ECAP process. So another great tool that you can utilize is to, once it's out, which will probably be not until next summer, but the ECAP will give you lots of different guidance on really where do I need to land. And then you can use tools like Plan to Protect or Kanakuk CPP or others that are out there to help resource you in those areas that you need a good system. We continue to work with vendors out there. We're working with one out of Iowa right now. That's Iowa. That's a background screen vendor, but he's passionate about protecting kids. His desire is to allow you a one flow through process to be able to, do the screening, but at the same time, that same technology also delivers the screening process of that, referrals, and the CPP training. So he's trying to come up with some really good tools. And then a lot of your insurance companies, most of them in this space, in the camping space. And I think you guys work with a tailored one for your camps and such. Really great resources to be able to use to fill in some of the gaps.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Rick, it's been great spending the last hour and a half with you. Thank you so much for being here today, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, I also fish. I teach fishing. I'm pretty good at canasta. So there's some other things that I do that are super fun. So Dan Whitlow, he's sitting on the lake there. You're my biggest fan today because I see you and me on that lake soon. So appreciate the time you guys have allowed me. God bless you all, and have a great summer.
I'll tell you what, I had one last entry question that just got here. Is there any basis to the QAnon theory?
Yeah, I have no comment.
Okay, not a trap question, just a trick question.
Yeah.
All right, Tracy, I think we've been blessed today having Rick here. Tell us about what's coming up in the future, our next Connect event.
Yeah, this has been rich, Rick, and thank you so much for taking the time to joining us, to leading us through the last hour and a half on a journey you've been on, sharing your world. We don't take it for granted, and so much affirmation and appreciation, and allowing us to record this so that, again, many of our camps will be able to view it later that weren't able to join us today. So thank you so much for your time together here and sharing your resources. This is huge for us. Hey, in a couple of weeks on February 9, we'll have our next Connect series meeting. And it's going to be on mental health for camps, specifically staff, as well as campers, as well as leaders. And specifically, Dr. Lisa Giebel is coming to do that with us. Now, she's worked really closely with Big Lake Youth Camp over the years and put together a significant internship program through Walla Walla University in Big Lake. So she'll be talking a little bit about that. She'll also be talking about social work connections into camp ministry. She'll also be talking about just how do you put together, okay, so you put together in your application process for campers, you have something for their medical and you need information on that, but what about their mental health? And so she's going to talk about some of those pieces as you're accepting camp applications as well as staff applications. So you're going to want to join us again right here on the AdventistCamps.org website. That's February 9 at 4 o'clock Eastern time zone with Dr. Lisa Giebel. So that's our next one that's coming up. And you'll see some more information on that on a flyer as soon as we get that put out, probably this next week. So with that, I think, Dennison, that's about what we got. I think we're ready to sign off. I want to just pray over us, and then we'll close out. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we've heard so much today, and in areas and places and spaces that we don't enjoy thinking about, and yet we've been here and our minds have been opened. We've got a lot of ideas. We're processing through stuff. And so Jesus, over the next hours and days and weeks, continue to bring us to conclusions on this topic of abuse with minors. Lord, continue to show us or inspire us with ideas and thoughts where we need to step up in the places and spaces where we serve. Help us not to miss your still small voice, Lord, and the promptings of your Spirit, and enable us to be more proactive in the protection of young people. And Lord, just guide and direct us, and we'll follow as you lead. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, I don't know if there's a sun's glow or just snow where you're at, but I hope your day turns out well. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Take care and have a great day.